you for joining us today for Recycle for Good, City of Milwaukee. Happy Earth Day, happy 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Great time to get together. As mentioned, my name is Samantha Longshore. I'm the Resource Recovery Program Manager for the City of Milwaukee. So really, any programming that the city is working on within the sanitation section that is diverting from landfill, probably involved in that. And one of the biggest programs that I'm working on is our curbside recycling collection. So we're going to talk a little bit about recycling today, some of the basics, and then kind of dig into a few more details that hopefully you'll find quite interesting. And before we dive in, I just want to give a little bit of background about the Department of Public Works sanitation section. So the Department of Public Works, or DPW, provides garbage and recycling collection for all the 1 to 4 unit households in the city of Milwaukee. So that's about 181,000 residences and fluctuates a little bit each year and during the year. If you are not a City of Milwaukee resident or if you do not live in a 1 to 4 unit household, there's still going to be a lot of information today that is relevant for you because if you live in a 5 unit home or larger, you'd likely have a commercial hauler that is taking your material to a facility, much like the one that we're going to talk about today. But it's always important, if you are not receiving the city services, that you do find your specific accepted materials list. So that might be through your municipality or through your hauler if you live in a larger facility. But again, a lot of the tips and tricks will be relevant to you today. So DPW operates 2 additional drop-off centers, one on the north side, one on the south side. Those are still open, and you can get information about those hours and locations at milwaukee.gov/dropoff. And then we also have a materials recovery facility, or a MRF. And if you follow us online, you may see a lot of hashtag the MRF. So that is this material recovery facility that you're seeing a photo of here. So the MRF is jointly owned through an intergovernmental agreement with Waukesha County and the City of Milwaukee, and it's operated under a third-party contract. So we have a third-party operator running that facility. This is an existing city site, and in 2015, it was retrofitted to move to SingleStream Recycling. So before that, we still were separating paper from our containers like plastic and aluminum. So this facility allows all materials to be placed into the cart together. And this facility, you can see it from I-94. It's located near Potawatomi. So if you keep an eye out for it, you're likely to see that building. So what's on the agenda today? We're going to talk a little bit about China's national sort policy. You've probably heard about that in the news a lot, really beginning last year. More often. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how the City of Milwaukee specifically is affected. We're going to talk about wishcycling and why we don't want to wishcycle, but are seeing a big rise in that. We're going to talk a little bit about what's accepted in your curbside cart or bin, what is not accepted, and then we'll dig into some of the how and whys of recycling to kind of answer why we ask you to do the things that we do. It's not just for fun. There are particular ways that we also like you to recycle. So first is China's national sort policy. So again, you've probably heard about this in the news. So it was a policy that was banning certain imports into China, and then you saw a few additional countries kind of joining in with some of these bans. And it was really also banning contaminated recycling. So the materials that we were sending had a lot of contaminants in them, and so they put more really strict policies about the percentage of contamination that could be in the materials that they were accepting. So what's contaminated, or what does contaminated mean? So contaminants are any unaccepted material, and this means that it could be trash, something that belongs in the landfill and not in recycling, but it can also mean the wrong recyclable. So really, a contaminant is a material that doesn't belong. And we'll talk a little bit more about when a recyclable material can be considered a contaminant and what those situations might be. So how is the city of Milwaukee affected directly by this policy? You may have heard radio stories, seen a few videos, read some articles about National Sword and about some municipalities in the U.S. that were sending all their recycling to landfill at the most extreme scenarios. The city of Milwaukee, we are really grateful that the recycling mills where we send our materials are domestic, so they are in the U.S. So there, are some municipalities that did export a lot of their recycling, and now that some of those markets are no longer accepting those materials, they're having to look for other locations to take their recyclables, and so that's why you saw some municipalities perhaps going to landfill. Wisconsin is also supported by a recycling law, which was put in place in 1990. So the recycling law banned certain materials from landfill in Wisconsin, for example, paper, number 1, and number 2, plastic containers, electronics. So with that state law, Wisconsin recycling is really buoyed by having that policy and that support underneath it as well. But we were affected and currently are affected in a few ways. The first is that it's kind of classic supply and demand. So with China National Sword and certain countries where recyclables used to be exported by different companies and municipalities in the US, with those markets closed, there's just a lot of recyclables that now are looking for a home in the US. So supply is up, which means that prices are down. So revenue is down for recyclables. And that's one of the biggest impacts on the city of Milwaukee. So we're still recycling all of your accepted materials. We'll talk a little bit about what is on our accepted materials list. And actually, you will be able to download that list, which is in the handout section of the presentation. So we'll show you that a little bit later too. So our first true or false question, true or false? I don't know if an item is recyclable. I should throw it in my recycling cart anyway. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer this. Again, if I don't know if an item is recyclable, I should throw it in my recycling cart anyway.
Okay, we had everyone who voted for false.
Hey, I like this group. So you nailed it. It's really important to, number 1, know before you throw. So it sounds like we've got an audience that is aware of this and aware of recycling right. So thinking about China National Sword, thinking about current recycling markets, what can we do to help the situation? And I think you'll all be really happy to know that, while shifts in the entire recycling industry seem and are quite large, there are certainly things that all of us can do to make that a little bit better. So number 1, let's do better. There are reasons that our export markets didn't want to take our materials because they were contaminated. So we were sending a lot of garbage along with those recyclables. So we want to improve our material quality, which means lowering contamination and recycling right. And so the first 2 rules of that, and something that I definitely want you to take away from this presentation, is number 1, to know before you throw. And number 2, when in doubt, throw it out. And this one's kind of tough for a lot of us. I know it was tough for me because we really want to recycle as much as we can, right? We want to keep things out of the landfill, but it's really important when in doubt to throw it out. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's true. So when we recycle right, when we limit contamination, we only throw accepted materials into the cart. That helps us in a few different ways. And one of those is that it helps us maintain our relationships with the mills. So again, that demand is high. They're are a lot of materials in domestic markets now. So it's really important that we keep sending a clean recycling stream to those mills so that our material is something that they want to keep receiving. And then to keep prices high, to keep revenue high, again, clean materials, knowing before we throw really helps us to promote revenue, but also reduce penalties and fines for there being a lot of contaminants in our materials. So we want to talk a little bit about wishcycling. And wishcycling is a verb. It means putting non-recyclable items in the recycling bin with the hope that they will be recycled, right? So it's the exact opposite of when in doubt, throw it out. And again, wishcycling comes from a good place. So there is an increased desire in diverting from the landfill or recycling any material that we can. Unfortunately, it leads to a lot of issues in recycling facilities and in the industry in general. And one rule I mentioned to a lot of people, if there's something about a material that you have and you're not sure if it's recyclable, you're not seeing it on the list, there's a reason that that material is giving you pause. And so it is very likely that it should be placed in the garbage, but that's kind of a number one sign. If there's something really unique kind of off about that material that you're not sure, that's probably a really good indication that it's not recyclable. So what happens when we wishcycle? Number one, high contamination. So just throwing a lot of materials into the cart, but not really knowing if they're accepted or not, just leads to more contamination. So more objects that just shouldn't be in the recycling stream that are being placed there, hoping that it can be recycled. And because of that high contamination, we can lose some of those export markets or even domestic mill options if they don't want to receive that highly contaminated material stream. This also drives down our material quality and can increase some penalties. And a really big one that I'd like you to take away is that you also pay twice to dispose of any unaccepted materials that are placed in recycling. So when you place materials in your recycling cart or bin, it's put into the truck, it's collected, taken to the MRF, our recycling facility, and that truck, when we bring in materials, we pay a processing fee based on the amount of tons in that truck. So if there are materials that are not accepted, we are paying for their weight to be processed through our recycling facility. And they can cause a lot of issues along the way. They can end up in the wrong bales as contaminants. They can end up wrapped around equipment and cause shutdowns. But once they work their way through the equipment and are not found in different recycling streams, they're sent out of the facility to be landfilled, where again, we pay a tipping fee for those items to be landfilled. So a really good way to think about it and kind of help your heart a little bit is that it really is efficient for the recycling stream to know before you throw, and anything that doesn't belong is not an accepted material. If you can't find a place for it, if it can't be donated, if it can't be reused, and it should not be recycled, it's best to send it to landfill right away instead of paying for it to be processed and then paying for it to be landfilled as well. And a big issue I know that everyone's kind of facing is that there are so many different products out there. Every day there is a new packaging material, new items that we're seeing from manufacturers. So I know that everyone's kind of bombarded with a lot of new things, and it's tough to know. But that's why we'll talk a little bit more about what it is accepted and what is not. So one great resource that I want to point out for everyone that may not be aware of it is MilwaukeeRecycles.com. So this is our new updated website. This was updated in July of last year, so one of my first projects when coming on board. And when you show up, you'll notice up at the top are a few questions that you might be coming to the website with. Number one being, what can I recycle? So here under what can I recycle, you'll see that there is a drop down, and the first item is the Curbside Recycling Guide. So this is a poster. It was included in a fall mailer that all the 1 to 4 unit households received last fall, and these are also the handouts that are attached with this webinar. So you can get a copy there, but if you're looking for another or want to send this to anybody, here is where they can find that accepted materials list for the city of Milwaukee. And right underneath that is the recycling directory. And in the directory, you will find just a few more unique materials. Again, we run into a lot of different materials in our lives. If you're not seeing an item on the accepted items list or on the list of unaccepted materials on the back, this recycling directory is just another location where you might find some more specifics, especially for items that maybe have unique drop-off opportunities for recycling or donation. So what's accepted curbside? So really, you want to keep it simple. Really, the simple household consumables are accepted for recycling curbside. So that means in your cart or in your bin. So we accept aluminum and steel cans, just empty and rinse them. We accept cartons, food and beverage cartons. You just replace them, empty them, rinse them, and replace the cap. Put the cap back on. So that is kind of a change that some people may be hearing. Before it was caps off, now it is caps on. If you have a loose cap that doesn't belong to a bottle, that should be placed in the garbage. And for the cartons, it is just those cartons that you find in your fridge or in your pantry. No cartons from the freezer. So for example, ice cream cartons. I think that's something that used to be on a list we had maybe 10 or 12 years ago in Milwaukee, but due to the lining in frozen cartons, that material is not accepted for recycling. So cartons from your fridge, cartons from your pantry. The next item are glass bottles and jars. Again, empty and rinse them, place them in, try not to break them. Paper items, your cereal boxes, newspaper, magazines, mail, even envelopes that have the small plastic window. Those are okay as is. You can actually just throw those in. And I say, don't even rip them in half, throw them in if they're junk mail. Flattened cardboard, really important. Was important before our current health situation. It's even more important now with everyone really counting on delivery for more items in the age of Amazon and the age of Chewy. It's important that you flatten those boxes for us for a few reasons. Number one, it's more likely that they'll fit in your cart, and that kind of limits the material outside the cart that our workers have to touch, which is just kind of helpful for us right now in maintaining their health and safety. Also, with flattened cardboard, it saves room in the truck. So when drivers have to pick up a lot of boxes that are not broken down, they can fill up the trucks really quickly. And sometimes they can't finish a route without having to stop and go to the recycling facility and tip, and then go out and finish the route, which is more emissions, it's more time, so it's just a bit more inefficient. And then the flattened cardboard is actually sorted more effectively at the recycling facility. So important to flatten that cardboard. Take out the styrofoam in the garbage cart. And the last item are plastic containers. So we say kitchen, laundry, bath, bottles, and containers. Empty them, rinse them, put the cap back on. And the plastics that are accepted now are number 1, number 2, and number 5. So a recent change in the accepted list, in the older list, number 4s were accepted. Those are no longer accepted. So it's really important to us that, again, the items that are on this list can ensure that they're being recycled. So there is the support of the landfill ban behind number 1 and number 2 plastics. There are more opportunities to recycle 1 and 2, and we're still seeing there are markets for number 5. So we accept those number 5s. But some of the mixed plastic bales, really we're kind of losing their market. So again, we want to make sure that what we're taking from you, we can ensure that those are being recycled. So with the plastics, any container, flip it over, check the bottom. You should see a little triangle there with a number, which represents the resin code of that plastic. If it has a 1, a 2, or a 5, it's in. So now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about what recyclable versus recyclable curbside means. And this is important because it can be a little confusing when you know that a material can be recycled, but sometimes it's just where can it be recycled that is a big difference. So for example, plastic bags. Plastic bags can be recycled through a retail drop-off. So a lot of grocery stores, a lot of retail stores have containers where you can return bags and also all kinds of plastic film to the store for recycling. But those plastic bags should not be put in your recycling cart. And that's because you'll see in this photo here, this is a screen. And so we'll see this in action a little bit later, but paper rides up and over and containers fall down. So on these metal rods, you'll see all of these rubber discs, these black plastic pieces, or rubber pieces rather, and they spin to sort those materials. And you'll see that when we get a lot of plastic bags and plastic film, it wraps around the equipment, and we actually have to shut down the entire facility because everything's connected, everything's flowing together, to cut out these plastic bags so that this equipment can do its job correctly. So again, just a great example of an item. It is recyclable, it's just not accepted in your curbside cart. So please, no plastic bags, no plastic film in your cart, and also don't bag your recyclables. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Another example are the scrap metal. So for example, scrap metal is recyclable. It should be taken to a drop-off center. And that's because if you think of items like car rotors or car bumpers, those are things sometimes that we get at the recycling facility. And as you can imagine, if those are coming through on belts, they can be a little bit dangerous for our workers and dangerous for our equipment. So imagine a big metal piece moving through against these spinning rods and kind of clanking around. So it can injure workers, it can damage equipment. So it is recyclable, just not in your cart. So please take any scrap metal to drop-off centers. And the other items I want to talk about briefly are items that really should be donated. Shoes, clothes, toys, baskets, hoses, for example. There are a lot of items that can't be used again in its original form. And if that's the case, it's really important to take those to a place where you can donate them, such as a Goodwill, when those spaces are back open and accepting donations. Any of those items, again, if they're not a household consumable, like you're seeing between your cans, your plastic, your paper on our list, those items, for example, here in this photo, you're seeing spring, when we got a lot of hoses that people put in their recycling carts. These are items, if they're working well, they could be donated, perhaps they could be fixed, but it's something that doesn't belong in a recycling cart. And as you'll see here, really anything that you can wrap around your arm can wrap around equipment at the MRF. So it's really important that hoses, wires, chains, Christmas lights don't go into your recycling cart as well. So now we're going to dig into a few more specifics, the hows and whys of recycling. So true or false, I should crush my recyclables to make them smaller. So for example, should I break stuff down so that I can fit more in my cart?
Okay, we have a bit of a split on this one. Of those who responded, 29% say true and 71% say false.
Okay. All right, so the answer to this is false. To the best of your ability, you should not try to crush or break down your recyclables to make them smaller, and we'll talk about why. So what you're seeing now are those screens where the plastic bags were wrapped around. So this is an image of the screens in action, which is really neat. So these screens, the discs that are wrapped around these metal bars, this is the great innovation that allowed us to have single stream recycling. Because how these work is that flat objects like paper ride up and over the screens and fall down into bunkers where they fall out onto another line. Workers do a little bit of quality control, try to pull out any materials that shouldn't be there, and then they're ready and held to be baled. Any 3D containers, so your plastics, your tin, your aluminum, your cartons, they roll back down these screens and then continue to a second area of the recycling facility to be further sorted. So any items, and this is a great video actually. So for example, you're going to see a milk carton that has been flattened. So now it's flat like paper instead of a 3D shape. And you're going to see it kind of riding up these discs where paper is going to go. So this is just kind of a new innovation with SingleStream that allows us to process a lot of materials through and sort by shape and size. And this is a little bit different. For example, one thing we recommend is don't hockey puck your cans, right? Don't crush your cans, which I know breaks a lot of people's hearts because it's kind of fun. And I know a lot of us probably grew up with this can crusher in their garage. And that's because we often at smaller recycling facilities, perhaps we were taking all of our materials and throwing them into different piles and sorting ourselves. Or especially with cans, because you can get a good price for aluminum, you were maybe crushing them on your own, and then when you filled up a barrel, you took in that aluminum in exchange for some funds, you turn them in yourself. So now that we are working with this SingleStream source, it's really important to keep them in their original shape. One, because this is sorting by shape, but also when you crush a can, it's really small, and so it can also just have difficulties working its way through the machinery. So we want to try to the best of our ability, keep everything in its original shape and size. So paper should be flat. Any other objects, try to keep at least a little bit of a 3D shape. So we want to talk a little bit about where the flattened containers are going to end up. So for example, this milk carton that's flat and it's riding up with the paper. So what you're seeing here is the inside of a mixed paper bale. So this was final material that was baled, put into a square, compressed, ready for shipping. So we cracked it open, and what you're going to see circled in blue are some flattened plastic containers. So here are a few flattened milk jugs, another flattened plastic container, a plastic bag over here. So it kind of illustrates that some of these items, when not in their original shape and size, can end up in the wrong places. And this is a perfect example, these plastic containers, of what we talked about a little bit earlier, that even recyclable materials sometimes can be considered contaminants. And this is an example. In a paper bale, where we really want paper and paperboard products, if we have plastic there, that plastic is now a contaminant because it didn't make it to the right place. And so you may be asking, why do we then move to a single stream recycling? Why don't we continue to do sorting, where we used to have two different bins and we put paper in one place and we put our containers in another? And while there are a few reasons, one big one is that we are just processing a lot of material. All of us are really creating a lot of recyclables that need to keep moving in that process and need to move quickly. So our recycling facility processes daily, sometimes between 250 and 300 tons of recycling every single weekday, and some additional tonnage on Saturdays. What you're seeing right now, this pile is about 80 tons. So 80 tons compared to about 250 that we might see in just a day. So again, there are a lot of materials coming through. We're producing a lot. This system, when we all follow the rules and just recycle right, it allows us to process these materials really efficiently and keep that system moving well. So as long as we know before we throw, we're putting in the right things in the right ways, this system can really send a lot of materials through. So our next true or false question, I should rinse my containers before recycling them. True or false?
Okay, and for those people who answered 97% say true and 3% say false.
All right, you guys are good. You're on your game today. So of course, that is true. You should rinse your containers before recycling them. And I'm going to show you why. And it is really fun. So recyclables, I say recyclables are like dishes, right? So we use a bowl or a plate in our kitchen and then we clean it and then we can use it again, right? We don't dirty it up and then throw the plate away. So just like we want to reuse some of our dishware, giving recyclables a quick rinse allows them to be used again and turned into new products. And specifically, we're going to look at plastics. So a few reasons that we don't want any food waste, we don't want any beverage waste in the recyclables. Number one, for example, sometimes we see like a half full pop bottle. If that gets crushed or squished and that pop spills out on paper or cardboard, for example, you can think pretty easily how soggy that gets and how it loses its structural integrity and can tear and turn into a mess, right? So there's the possibility that the food waste and the beverage waste can contaminate and break down other recyclables and make them not recyclable either. Food waste and beverage waste, again, it rots and it's kind of stinky and it's kind of gross. So also helping us maintain a really clean space and recycling facility is helped by not sending food and beverage waste. And another reason is that some of the pieces of technology that we use to sort the materials in really interesting ways relies on those containers being clean and empty. So you don't have to send it through a dishwasher, but we say, you know, give it a rinse, give it a quick clean. So the plastics are sorted by these machines called optical. I'm going to show a quick video here. In the recycling facility, we have 3 different optical sorters. And what the optical sorters are doing is they're sending rays of light. They're sending lasers and looking at all of the materials that are coming through. So you're going to see we just have primarily containers left. All of the paper is being pulled on those screens a little bit before, and all the containers are riding through. So at this point, we still have our plastics, we still have cartons, and we still have aluminum cans. And this optical is shining a light to try to determine what kind of plastic and what kind of resin type these containers are, based on how quickly that light comes back to the sensor. So when, for example, this optical is looking for number 2 plastics. So it's sending light, depending on how quickly that light comes back. If it identifies that something is a number 2, it's going to send a quick puff of air and push the number 2s up and over a small wall that's in this space that you're looking at. Anything else that it's not identifying as number 2 is just rolling off of that belt and continuing its journey. So watching the video, you're going to see milk cartons and laundry detergent bottles getting shot up and over, so see them bouncing. So the light is going, oh, that's a number 2. It's shooting a puff of air and it's sorting those number 2s. So for example, if you have a dirty container, it's full of liquid, it's covered in food waste, the optical sorter may not be able to read that plastic and understand that it's a number 1 or a number 2 or a number 5. So we'll talk a little bit about that journey. So we're talking about the journey of 2 real mayo bottles. This was just something kind of interesting that we found at the MRF. One example of a real mayo that was rinsed, it's nice and clean, and another mayo bottle that still has a lot of mayonnaise in it. Besides the smell, this mayo is going to have a tough time getting to the right location to be recycled. So these are number 1 plastics. So they're dropped up on the tip floor here. So they're put in the truck after being grabbed from your cart and dropped on the floor. It starts its journey. It goes through a pre-sort line where everyone's trying to pull off dangerous items or items that don't belong. Materials head up over these screens. That's where the paper is riding up and over and the containers are falling down. The containers are then heading over to the second portion of the facility here, and you can see these optical sorters. So when it hits the first optical sorter, the clear real mayo has a light shining at it. The optical says, yep, that's a number 1. shoots a puff of air, it's over, it's now sorted with the number ones and ready to be baled. It shoots a ray of light at the real mayo that is still covered in mayo, and that light's not coming back at an appropriate time, and so that optical is saying, that's not a number one. So it continues on, a light shoots at it, says, this isn't a number two plastic either, continues on, gets another ray of light through the third and final optical. It's not a number five either. It's not responding in an appropriate way. And if it's not being picked up and sorted by that equipment, it is then considered residue. It's at the end of the line. It has not been pulled off and sorted, and ends up as trash. So this is just an example of that piece of equipment, and that it really does rely on us rinsing those containers. So it's not just funny to ask. It actually is really important to that equipment so that it can read and sort appropriately. True or false? And I think I gave this away a little bit earlier, but this is an important one. So we're going to know before we throw. When in doubt, throw it out. This is the next item that I really want you to take away from this. True or false? I should bag my recyclables before I put them in the recycling cart.
Okay, we have 100% of people say false.
Excellent. All right. So glad to hear that. Yes, so the answer here is false. Sorry. Okay. All right. So hopefully everyone can still see this. Okay, perfect. So I am so happy that you all said that. It is so important that you keep your recyclables loose in the cart. I'm glad that you all know that. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a stranger nicely if you see them. So recyclables need to show up at the recycling facility ready to be sorted. And again, because this is single stream, it's really important that they are ready to come through on this pre-sort belt, which we talked about a little bit earlier. This is the first location where all those materials come through, and our teams are trying to pull key items. And typically, again, it's those car rotors, it's bumpers that we get, hoses, Christmas lights, propane tanks, which are extremely dangerous and should not be put in your recycling cart. And can cause fires and explosions. You'll probably see that in the news a lot. So they're really busy. They're trying to pull off the items that are dangerous. So there isn't a lot of time in the process to grab a bag, open it, hope it's recyclables, dump it out, and send those recyclables on their way. Because maybe in doing so, they missed that 2x4 that went past them that's now about to go around the equipment and perhaps damaging equipment, getting jammed, needing us to shut down. So really a plastic bag, even if it's a clear bag, we say no plastic bags any longer. Keep it loose in that cart. That being said, garbage should be bagged. Garbage is going to landfill. We want to make sure it doesn't blow away, but recyclables, keep it loose. So again, it's one less contaminant to grab. It's one less priority for those teams that are trying to get rid of the plastic bags, the plastic film, and it's making sure that those materials are ready for sorting. And something that we're starting to see as well is that bag recyclables, even before they're leaving the truck, as they're being tipped onto the floor, that is considered contamination. So a lot of municipalities, a lot of haulers are starting to see contamination fees as well. So again, just another penalty for these items being in the recycling. And if there's a lot of bagged recyclables, sometimes it means a rejected load of recyclables. So really important to keep it loose. Again, tell your friends, tell your family. Very important for us that those materials show up and are ready to go. All right, And that is everything. So we're going to take a little time for questions, but if anyone needs to go, I want to thank you again for being here and joining the webinar with us today. Again, happy Earth Day. If you are not currently following us, if you want more tips and tricks and insights, again, take a look at MilwaukeeRecycles.com. Or you can follow us on Facebook. We're Milwaukee Recycles. You'll see that Recycle for Good logo. And on Twitter, we're MKE Recycles. So feel free to follow us and share some of those tips and tricks as we find them along the way. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Samantha. We do have quite a few questions, so I'll start reading through these, and hopefully we can get through everyone's questions. The first one is, how much money does Milwaukee make on recycled material, and where does that money go?
Right, so the exact amount that I don't have on hand, but it will be in, so on this MilwaukeeRecycles.com, there is a reporting section up at the top, and so our annual report will include our revenue. So it's typically over $1 million, and as mentioned in the beginning of the program, in a typical recycling market, that money will offset about 10% of the cost of the recycling collection service. So it doesn't totally offset it. I mean, it's not even half of the offset, but again, it is offsetting part of that collection service. So it does go back into the general fund for the city to support that service. So even though it is kind of a smaller portion, and maybe a little bit less now with revenues down, it is creating revenue. It is offsetting that service as opposed to throwing everything in the landfill, which we just pay for entirely. So usually about 10% offset of the collection service, and maybe a little bit less right now.
Thank you. The follow-up question by the same question asker was, what material does the city make the most money on? Would that also be in the annual report?
It might be. So typically, and it kind of depends. There are a couple ways to look at it. So there are certain materials that are worth more, create more revenue. For example, one of those is aluminum. Aluminum, the price for it is typically really high. But what you'll see in the annual report are the percentages of our material stream from the city of Milwaukee that's made up of different materials. So aluminum is an example of something that revenue is high on, but it makes up a pretty small percentage of our stream. And that, again, it's just we're not getting as many of those materials. It weighs a little bit less. So that's an example. So something else that can generally be a good revenue producer is cardboard. And that's something that we get a lot more of. Again, people just have more cardboard, there's more weight. So there's a couple ways to look at it based on really just how much of our stream is a certain material and then what that revenue is, but you'll be able to see that breakdown in the annual reports.
Great, thanks. The next question is for glass bottles that have metal caps. Do you throw out the metal caps?
You do, yes. So glass should not have the caps on them because generally you are seeing glass bottle metal caps. So anytime you have different material types, make sure they're separated. But with the caps, they tend to be smaller. So we say put those directly in the garbage if you can't source separate them at a drop-off center, for example.
Oh. How many people are employed by Milwaukee for recycling?
So the city of Milwaukee Sanitation Department, we provide all of the hauling services for the city, and there are a few hundred employees who work recycling routes, but some of the team members work different roles. And something that's kind of interesting and something I didn't realize before coming here as well is that recycling truck drivers, those that are on garbage routes, some other groups like forestry also work snow duty or fall leaf collection. So a lot of the workers rotate seasonally and work for different services throughout the year as well. And then the recycling facility itself, there's usually about 26 sorters, and those are Republic employees. So that is our third-party operator. So they employ all of the workers that are there helping doing the sorting and the maintenance and that sort of work.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, shredded paper used to be accepted in transparent plastic bags. Is that not the case anymore?
Correct. So plastic bags no longer accepted. Shredded paper, you can still send that in your cart. We just say put it in a paper bag and seal it up, give it one staple, and then it can be recycled. But really with shredded paper, we say if you don't have to shred it, please don't. You know, if it's got a social security number on it, shred it. If it's just a piece of junk mail, probably throw it directly into the recycling bin. And not only does that help ensure that we will catch that paper, but when you shred paper, you break down those fibers. And so that paper cannot be recycled as many times because you're kind of breaking that structural integrity down. So we say if you don't have to shred it, try not to.
Great. Okay, recycling rules change. How often should we check for updates to the recycling guide quarterly?
I mean, that's a really good question. And it can, like the last guide that came up, it was many years that we have the same guide. I would say it's, you know, it's important to kind of pop in, you know, every 6 months if you can. It's something you can do pretty quickly, you know, going to MilwaukeeRecycles.com, check what's accepted. Every 6 months is probably too often, but it's good to stay in the know and see if there are updates. But generally, you can go years without seeing a change.
Oh, great. We have time for a couple more. How up to date is our sorting machines? Are there different types and sophistication of sorting machines across the country and globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So our equipment was all installed in 2015. So in the state of Wisconsin, we have a pretty nice facility. I was actually just able to go to a conference and talk with other municipalities, and ours is pretty new and has really neat equipment. So those optical sorters, a really large magnet that pulls tin. So we do have one of the newer facilities, at least in the state, and one of the larger balers in the country, actually. So really new comparatively, but something else that you're starting to see are robotics that are being used. And so those are machines that use artificial intelligence and actually can start to identify different types of materials. And some of them work in different ways, but one, for example, that Waste Management has at the end of a line to try to grab against some things that were missed, can identify up to 3 different types of material. And so it's one last chance to grab more materials. So that's something that you're seeing, but they are quite costly right now. But our technology is fairly new.
Great, thank you. So we have a question. Do I need to take the junk mail out of the envelope with the plastic window, or can I just leave it sealed in the envelope?
You can leave it sealed in the envelope. If you know, like if you can feel that there's something hard in there, like maybe they've sent you a card, you know, something that like might be plastic, I would open that up. But if you can tell it's just paper, keep it all together, throw it right in. That is something that I stopped doing. I stopped ripping, keep it whole, throw it right in.
Okay. Can you share whether there are tours available of the MRF facility?
They're so Keep Greater Milwaukee Beautiful. They're a nonprofit that we partner with, and they provide a lot of our tours and education. So no in-person tours right now, but they are doing some webinars about the MRF. But once we kind of get back to normal, they do have tours every month where you can go in and see the MRF, and then we also open up tours for Doors Open Milwaukee. So stay tuned for that, I believe in September, and there are some tours. You just have to try to get in to get those ticketed tours, but otherwise you can come down, see some videos, see the building. So there are a few opportunities to get in there, and I highly recommend it. It's really, really neat to see.
Cool. We have another question around whether something can be recycled. Those aluminum trays that you often get from restaurants for delivery, if those are washed, can those be recycled?
They can be. So aluminum trays and aluminum foil can be recycled. What we say though, especially for foil, is that, again, it's kind of that situation where you want larger items to make sure that they can get through the system. So when it comes to foil, we say keep it clean and then try to ball it up so that it's at least the size of your fist or larger, and that will help make sure that it can get through the system. But yes, clean foil containers are good.
Great. Is there national legislation seeking to streamline packing materials to make recycling more feasible?
At the national level, there's nothing active currently. A lot of different states do try to encourage product stewardship. So in Wisconsin, one organization is the Associated Recyclers of Wisconsin, and that's a group that gets together and does keep an eye on legislation and serves as a resource to promote different items like that. So nothing nationally. There, could be things that come and go, but you will see different states kind of putting forward legislation about packaging so that, really their residents are seeing things that can be recycled, or that, if it can't, there's some kind of take back. So product stewardship and responsibility is something that municipalities all really want to make sure that we get the right materials and put them back, but nothing large and national at this moment.
Okay. We have two questions that I think are connected. The first one was, what percentage of Milwaukee residents recycle correctly? And then someone else had asked, is there some way that we can help educate citizens by applying the charts to the recycling carts, or even having large signs that say no plastic bags? So it seems like it's getting at that educational piece. I don't know if there are stats on how many people in Milwaukee are currently recycling correctly.
Yeah, we don't have any existing stats about the number of households that recycle correctly. Something that was done in 2018 was going through different neighborhoods and reviewing the recycling carts twice. So 2 consecutive recycling pickups. And if they found things that were incorrect, they put a tag on it and said, oops, here's what we're seeing that shouldn't be in. Or if they were recycling correctly, they got, hey, great job tag as well. And then they went back on the next recycling pickup and looked again. And we saw from that exercise that there was a significant increase in the amount of households that, had put something that was unaccepted, that, their carts were looking good by the second time. Unfortunately, those efforts are really staff intensive and can be difficult to do on a regular basis. So there isn't readily existing data of how many households are or are not recycling correctly. But something else that we do every year is we run a full day test to get a composition analysis. So the pile of materials that you saw earlier, that 80 tons, that was part of that test. And we do a random sampling from trucks in the city that are coming in over a week, and then run all that material through for each specific entity. So at our recycling facility, it's not only City of Milwaukee tons, but those coming from Waukesha County and a few other municipalities. So we do that test every year so that we can get a look specifically at our own materials and understand what percentage are non-accepted, and then what percentage are those different materials too. So that's another way that we try to get a look at what we're getting more of. Are we getting more residue? Are we getting less? And then the second question, remind me of the second one. I think, what can we do?
Yeah, how to educate citizens more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say, if they can stay connected to our Facebook, our Twitter. We also have a lot of handouts because I know not everybody is online. It's something that's kind of easy for us because it's a lower cost way to reach people when we can do a lot online. It's, really just manpower to get that information out there. But, please feel free to share what you see. If you find a resource, and can print it and give it to somebody so that they know. I think one of the best parts of my job is that when we post different pieces of material, other people that tag somebody and say, see, I love that. That makes me so happy when everyone kind of uses the resource to prove, something about how a friend or a family member was not recycling right. So, please just share that information. You can find a lot of resources on the website if you, would like paper, that sort of thing to give to individuals. So that's kind of the best, word of mouth is important, and people being able to hear the advice from somebody that they love, somebody that they respect, that they know, is really important too. So just kind of, spreading the word and word of mouth is certainly important. And then we'll probably see a large education campaign next week because we recently approved that everybody's recycling schedule will go to every other week citywide. So everyone's kind of on a different schedule right now, but everyone will have a consistent every other week starting next year, so 2021. So part of that will be a nice education campaign in partnership with another nonprofit. So you'll be seeing some more educational resources in different formats and places next year.
Okay, great. Well, we're actually out of time. So if anyone had questions that we weren't able to get to, are they able to reach out on the various platforms that you have here, either Facebook or the number?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you can let us know. You can post comments. You can send messages through either of these. If you go to MilwaukeeRecycles.com, you can also sign up for e-notifies and send contact information there. You can also call the city hotline if you prefer the phone. The call center staff are the true champions because they really have a good understanding of all pieces of the city. So you can also give a call and get any information there as well. So a few different ways to find us.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. I know I learned a lot. I want to thank everyone who joined us this afternoon, and we'll be in touch with some additional handouts and hopefully a recording. And thank you again. So bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.